Hello, world history students. Today we will be discussing Nazi expansion known as Hitler's aggressions. So I'm going to look at the question, how did Hitler carry out his Lebensraum promise? So Lebensraum, one of Hitler's core promises to the German people during his push for election, the idea of living space that was needed for Germans to grow and spread. This space would come from the expansion east into Poland and Russia. This belief that Germans needed more space, they needed to be a land-orientated people with big expansive farms and lesser people serving them on these farms. And so his promise was always that they would get back not only the land that they had lost in the Treaty of Versailles, but also other ancestral lands that they believed always should have belonged to them. And the people who had been living there, who were inferior, would be removed. So the Anti-Comintern Pact, this is an agreement between Germany, Japan, and Italy. It becomes, and in the name itself, you can see the anti-communist idea. This pact becomes the Axis powers. These will be the powers that fight against what are known as the Allied powers. You have Japan, which we'll talk about tomorrow, operating heavily in the east, and you have Germany and Italy taking over Europe and Africa in the west. Austria and Czechoslovakia are two regions that Germany lost land to when you had different treaties after World War I and eventually after World War II. They will lose land to these different regions, but the people inside of these regions, many of which still speak German, they still eat German food, they still think of themselves as Germans, but they're now living outside of Germany. So one of Hitler's promises is to return them to the motherland, bring them back in to the nation's borders, which thus means expanding the nation's borders. So first you have Austria. In 1938, they are going to join Germany with no resistance. This is a picture of the parades that met the Nazi soldiers as they came into Austria. Many Austrians speak German. They view themselves as German. Hitler is from Austria, so this is significant as well. And so they greet the incoming Nazis. This doesn't mean every Austrian was happy. I mean, especially Jewish Austrians were probably quite frightened, and many left the country. But overall, Austria is excited to join the new Nazi party. The Nazis had just hosted the Olympics at this point. They were on the world stage, and this was their first real aggressive action, even though the Austrians did not put up an official resistance. Czechoslovakia, now they don't take the whole region, but they will take part of it. The Sudetenland, which is a region that has these ethnic Germans that felt like they were being mistreated by this new country, Czechoslovakia, that's created after World War I. They don't identify with that country, they identify with their own German country, and so you see a picture here of a lady who's sobbing out of joy that the Germans have come back and taken over this region. Appeasement is something that's going to go down as a major failure by the West. So Britain and France are going to appease the Germans after they take Austria and Czechoslovakia. The British and French are going to say, okay, Germany, you took that much, but now we're done. Don't take any more. And of course, Hitler says, yeah, and promises not to do any more. But everybody knows that he's not going to keep that promise. But the goal is to appease him for now because the world's still recovering from the Great Depression. It's still suffering from it in some regions. And they just don't want to get into another world war right now. But they begin to prepare for war. Both in the United States and Britain and France, they start considering pre-war mobilizations. And that's because they can see the writing on the wall. The world sees that Germany is easily taking up regions and that they're not sure who can stop them. So Britain and France sign a pact to protect Poland from invasion. Now, Poland is another country that's created by the Treaty of Versailles, and it had historical roots as well, but this country is created out of that land, and the idea is that they will maintain the treaty and the world after the treaty if they just protect Poland. But the Nazis and the Soviets, you got the Nazis in black here. You can see the regions that they're going to take over, and the Soviets in red. They both want land. Remember, the Russians gave up land to the Germans to get out of World War I. That land was then gobbled up by the Treaty of Versailles, so the Russians have lost land because of the treaty. The Germans lost land because of the treaty, and they decide to make a non-aggression pact. They draw a line between Poland and Romania and different parts of Eastern Europe where that's their territory. They won't attack each other, but they will go up to that territory. So many of these new countries that are created by the treaty are split up by these two powerhouse countries. So Britain and France declare war on the Nazis. They don't declare war on the Soviets. That could have definitely changed the tide of history. They declare war on the Nazis after their invasion of Poland in 1939. The United States does not declare war. We still stay out of it. But once they declare war, it doesn't mean that immediately Britain is attacking Germany. It's more a state of war. And Germany has to decide what to do. And they do. They begin to invade places like Scandinavia, Denmark and Norway. They leave Sweden alone for its neutral status. But what they get out of this, they get oil fields and they get airfields that can attack Britain. And this is definitely not so much to invade Scandinavia, but to show Britain that now they can attack them from the air from multiple points. They also invade the Low Countries, known as the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. They roll over quite quickly. You can see the Maginot Line is down here, and it's in France. And the idea is that it's going to stop Germans from coming in. So the Germans just go around the line, much like they did in World War I. So it's surprising that people don't learn from these things. But they come around with their tanks. They take over these countries quickly. And the French are quickly overwhelmed by the new German fighting tanks, which are the best in the world. The British that had shown up to support the French after the declaration of war, they now are trapped. And they need to get across, and this becomes known as the evacuation at Dunkirk. And it will take many ships to get the British out of this region. And the British had come up there to help support not only the French, but the Low Countries as well, such as Belgium and the Netherlands. But they're going to have to evacuate to England, which actually is just across the channel. So it's going to take everything from fishing ships to military ships to try to get these troops back to England, and they're largely successful to get them back, and then they are used in subsequent conflict later. But the invasion of France, this is the iconic picture of Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower. After the combined British force was evacuated, the French were left to fight the invading Germans. The French quickly fall, some even side with the Germans, and the Germans are going to stay there now for several years. And by taking over France, they sign a peace treaty in a train car that was used to sign the peace treaty to end World War I, which was so embarrassing for the Germans. So they make sure to find the same train car and sign this peace treaty, showing that the Germans had won. Hitler was trying to show this as a continuation of World War I, that actually Germany didn't really lose because in the long run they've won now. So there's deep-seated resentment from World War I, and this is going to lead to this invasion of France. And now Britain largely stands alone in Europe. The Soviets still have their non-aggression pact, and you have the British who are standing alone. The French are gone. The Spanish are neutral because they have their own fascist civil war. The Swedish are neutral. The Irish are neutral. So it becomes Britain versus Germany and Italy in Europe. And for now, the United States will not join. So stay tuned and we'll talk about more next week. Thank you.